Hello friends, welcome to Weapon Technologies. Today we are going to discuss about MVC validation with loosely binding. So let's start. Before we start applying validation in our application, let me tell you why we basically use validation. So validation is used to filter the data and check whether data is correct or not entered by the user. Let's suppose we have one form in our application and we want to take input from the user. So in order to validate the data, we go for the validation, right? And because this is not in our hand, user can enter anything in the input information whatever we are trying to capture from them, right? So what are the different attributes that we can apply in our validation? As you can see on the screen, required input, maximum or minimum length, email format, or any other regular expression format according to our need, we can define in our application, right? Normally, in any application, we have two types of validation. One is your client-side validation and other is your server-side validation. Client-side validation basically happens on the browser end, on the front end, right? And that can be implemented with the help of scripting languages like JavaScript, Angular, jQuery, Knockout, etc. Right? And server-side validation is normally done in C# behind the code, right? So let's go to our Visual Studio and let's basically apply validation, how we can apply validation in our project. As you can see on the screen, I have simply created one empty MVC application architecture by the name validation in MVC, right? And now let's go to controller and add one simple controller and let's give it a meaningful name. We can see our controller has been created, our home controller. And for this index section method, let's create one view by the same name index. Our index view is also ready, right? Now, before applying validation, we need to create one simple form, right? So for creating a simple form, let's first of all create a model. So let's create one model and this time let's name student or any meaningful name we can give it over here. And inside this class, I'm going to define some properties, and these are the properties I have defined. You can see first name, last name, age, email, and these basically fields we are going to create in our simple form to take input from the user, right? So let's go back to our design view, and over here let's create one simple design form. And you can see I have created one simple form which is containing four text boxes: first name, last name, age, email, whatever we have declare in our student class, right? All these properties I have defined in our design view, right? And one submit button I have taken. When the user will click on the submit button, then this will hit, then the control will hit basically to this action method inside home controller, and that will be your post request type, right? So let's go back to our controller and let's create this submit form action method, because we don't have any such action method inside this home controller. So getting my point? And let's name submit form action, right? And now this view, right? This view, we have to basically make this view to use student model, right? And for that we need to write on the top of this model, then the name of application, right? Validation in MVC dot, we are going to use model, and which model we are going to use? Student, for this view. You can see So now this particular view is specifically, we can say it's tightly coupled to use the student model on this view, right? Now let's save the changes, and after entering all the values in this form, when we will click on the submit button, then the control will hit to submit form action method inside the home controller, and that will be a post type request. So let's go back to our home controller. The control will hit over here submit form action method and inside the home controller, but this action method we have to make of request post type. That means this action method is now going to accept the request of having post type request, right? So that's it. And now let's write our condition here. And for using student model inside this controller, we need to import over here also. So let's call it, we want to apply models. Basically we want to use models, and now we can use we can use student model over here. Let's create object of student, right? And let's apply one condition over here. If model state is valid, and we need to return view, right? Why we are applying this condition? Because let's suppose after entering all the values in this control, when we will click on the submit button, then the control will hit this submit form action method, right? The control will come here submit form action method, and all the values will be automatically binded in this student object model, right? So if model is valid, which model we are talking about? We are talking about here student model. So if all the property values are valid, in that case this condition will return true, and if any one property is having wrong data, in that case this statement will return false. So remember one thing, when all the property values are correct uh, in this object, then it will return true, otherwise it will return false, right? And if model is valid, if all the data entered in all the properties are correct, in that case we need to return view. And which view we want to return? The default view of this action method, and the default view of this action method is what? Submit form, which we haven't created it yet. So let's go and create one view for this action method also by the same name, right? And if data is correct, then we need to display message data added successfully, right? That's it. Save the changes, right? And now let's run the application. So before applying the validation, let me show you. Then after this we will apply validation, and now you can see our form has been rendered in the browser. So let's click on this button before entering any value. These control first name, last name, age, email, right? And let me put a breakpoint. Yes, breakpoint is already there. So I'm going to click on this button. Let's see what happens. You can see our control is hitting to this submit form action method, and let's check in this object. You can see in this student object model, email, first name, last name, all are coming null. This thing should not happen, right? So for that reason we basically apply validation to inform the user that you should enter some data and you should enter correct data. So that's why we apply validation. uh, let's suppose uh, if we are coming to this and this model is turning false, right? And after this we can call our database layer, and all these data will be saved in the database table with the null values. So this thing should not happen. So to avoid this, we basically go for the validation. So let me stop the application and let's apply the validation. And how we can apply the validation? Let's go back to our student model, and for applying validation we do have one namespace system.data component right? Basically component model dot data annotations. This is the main namespace in which all the validation attributes are available for applying validation in the MVC application, right? And let's apply required attribute first of all. That means we are making this field mandatory for the user to enter on the UI. He can't left blank, right? So let's apply to all the properties, right? And for email, let's apply, we have one more attribute, that is email address. That means we need to enter exact format of email address, right? So after applying this, now let's go back to our code and let's run the application again. Now this time our form has been rendered, right? And now let me remove the point first of all. Let me show you. And now let's enter data which is correct first of all, right? Then this is your last name. We can enter age. Then we can enter your email, right? And let's click on this button. So as soon as I'm going to click on this button, right, you can see our control is going to on this next view, that is data added successfully. So let's go back to UI and let me put a breakpoint and let me show you with debugging. So I'm going to click on this. I'm going to click on this button. Click me, right? This will control will hit this submit form action method, right? And now let's check over this model. We can see all the data which we have entered on the UI, age, email, first name, last name, is basically automatically binded in this model, right? That means all the property values are true. We can see in that case this condition will return true, right? So that's why it is returning true. And after that, this is going to return default view of the section method. And default view of the section method is submit form, on which we are displaying message data added successfully. So let's click on this button and we can see data added successfully. Now let's suppose we are not providing this, right, this last name. And now let's click on this button. Let's see what's going to happen. Now this time in this model we can see all property values are correct, but last name we haven't provided. That means this property value is not correct. Now this time our model is not valid, so it will return false. You can see model is returning false, right? So that's why it is going to return a view. Okay, we need to define the view over here. So we need to define the we need to remain on the same view, right? So let me stop the application and we need to define the view, right? Otherwise it will go to the default view of the section method, right? So we have already, yes, so we have defined it. Let's run the application. Our form has been rendered. So let's enter value, and this time we are not going to provide value for last name, right? And for age we have provided data, right? And now I'm going to click on this button, click me. Let's see what's going to happen. Control is heading to our submit form action method. This time same, all property values are correct except last name. We haven't provided data to the last name. That means our model is not valid. So that's why this model is returning false, because our model is not valid, right? And it's going to execute this statement, and this is going to return index view, which is our same view, so that will remain on the same page, right? Let me remove this breakpoint and you can see now I'm clicking on this button. You can see I'm clicking multiple times, but it is remaining on the same page. Why? Because it is because our model is not valid and it is not going to another view, right? But how the user will come to know that he is doing something wrong, or he has provided some data wrong? So for that reason we need to display validation message over here, so that user can come to know that he has entered wrong data, and he can correct his data, right? So for that reason we need to apply validation message. So how we can apply validation message? So let's go back to code and let me stop the application. Yes, and now to our index view, that is our design, we do have a property validation message we can apply to each control, right? That is called our validation message. We can see over here, and for which we want to apply for first name, right? So similarly, we can apply for all the controls, right? Then age, then email, right? And we need to replace this because we are going to apply for this last name. This is we are going to apply for age, and this is we are going to apply for email, right? That's it. Now a default message will be displayed in the application if the user is not entering anything, right? So let me save the changes and run the application again. Yes, our form has been rendered. Now let's do not enter anything in any control, and finally click on this button, right? As soon as I am going to click on this button, we can see our validation message is basically fired, and it is telling us that first name field is required, last name field is required, age, and similarly email field is required. So this is our default message. We can intimate the user basically that you need to enter all these data over here, right? So let's suppose we are entering any value, right? And now when we are clicking on this button, you can see these validation message will move automatically. And now age we are going to provide, and let's suppose we are providing any wrong email format. Now we can see your email field is not a valid email address because we have applied our email address attribute over this class. For email property, we can see email address. So that's why it is displaying a default message to the user, right? But now let's say we want to customize the message. So is it possible? Yes, we can customize the message. We can write our own messages to display the user, and this could be done by using, let me stop the application and let's go back to our model. This is our student model. We are on the same, and over here we can define our customized message, and we can write please enter the first name, right? And similarly we need to define over here other message, right? And similarly we can apply to all the properties, right? Getting my point? So this is how we can customize our messages according to our need. And this time for this we need to change for last name, this is for age, and this is for email, right? Let's remove this, right? Getting my point? Now let's save the changes and run the application once more. You can see our form has been rendered. So let's click first of all on this button, submit button. Just click me. Let's see. Yes, our customized message is being displayed on the UI. Please enter the first name, last name, age, and last. Please enter the email, right? So this is how we can customize our message by applying this in this required attribute, right? So now let's enter the value, correct data, right? And then we can provide age, and then we can provide email, right? And now let's click on this button. We can see our data added successfully. So our code is working fine. And we are not going to provide this data. Then see, we can see it is saying please enter the last name, right? So this is how we can apply the validation. And let me show you with the help of debugging. I'm going to put a breakpoint over here, and let's click on this button. We haven't provided this value, so it will say, you can see our object last name we are getting null, and when we are debugging it is saying model is not valid because one property is having wrong data. and it is going to stay on the same page, and it is still saying please enter the last name. And now let's say we are providing correct data. Let's say enter anything, and let's click on this button. We can see in object our this model is totally correct, right? This time our model is valid, it is saying true. So that's why it will return the default view of this action method, which is our submit form, and it will display the message data added successfully, right? So this is how we can apply the validation in our MVC application according to our need, right? So that is all for the validation, and let's meet in the next video with the new topic. And please like and subscribe my channel so that you can get all the latest notification of my upcoming videos in the future. So that's it. Bye. Take care.